So Pete, you've seen a lot of this talk, but there is some new stuff for you towards the end, and it's fun stuff too. So I'll let you know, and you can nap or key that. So looking at generation controls, right? So the first case that was demonstrated in a research environment, this happened at the Idaho National Labs, where researchers were able to hack into the generator SCADA system, and this is called the Aurora generator test, and they were able to blow the generator control system just from cyber command. And this was way back in 2007, and this project was, top secret for a long time, and now it's all become public information. So the next control attack that you've all heard of is Stuxnet in 2009. So attacks on the uranium centrifuges in Iran that made the centrifuge spin out of control. So that's going to be a theme in my talk as well, spinning out of control. And finally, more related to more recent and more related to power grids, the crash override in Ukraine. So that brought down the power grid in the capital city of Kiev. So there's plenty of motivation out there. There are more articles that I can put on here, but these are most relevant to my talk. So here the billion-dollar problem is that the cyber attacks can induce power outages, and these power outages, as Al said, these are cascading failures. These outages can disrupt daily life, and they cost billions of dollars to the economy. Now, power outages can be induced by cyber attackers, as in the case that I mentioned previously, but they could also be induced by energy companies. So Enron, an energy company way back in 2001, they were artificially creating power outages just so that the electricity price would spike up and they would make a lot of money from that increase in price. And that led to a loss of $40 billion. So I'm going to get to my threat model eventually, but then the threat model also includes energy companies causing blackouts, not just cyber adversaries. The problem exists because these critical infrastructure controls are increasingly connected to OT networks. So we spent a good 20 minutes on this a year ago where researchers on the remote side of this call were arguing whether the controllers were air-gapped or not. And I did verify from talking to David Brown of Schneider Electric. He's been working on generation controls for 40 years. And he said that while that is true, that those controls have been air-gapped for up until the last 10 years, it's only in the past 10 years that these controls are becoming increasingly connected to OT networks. And so there is a path from the OT network to change the generator settings. Objectives of the research are to understand how an attacker can gain that access to generator controls, how to thwart those attacks, and to evaluate what is the minimum effort that an attacker must make to cause an outage, and finally to identify both detection and mitigation approaches to such attacks. So let's take an example as we walk through the problem here. And I'm going to be talking about a specific resilience mechanism in power grids called primary frequency response. Maybe abbreviating that with PFR. So you see PFR as primary frequency response. So what you see on the left of the slide is a model of the power grid illustrated using the PowerWord simulator. So this is the 39-bus New England test system. It has 10 generators that have been highlighted in these blue circles. And of course, from the name, it has 39 buses. So these 10 generators, they could be generating power at different amounts with respect to their capacity. So that percentage you see there is relative to the generation capacity. Generator 1 is at about 90%, and so on. Now, let's look at a scenario where that generator 1, and I'm calling the generator bus number 39 is generator 1. So let's say we were to disconnect that generator, then what you would see, and the disconnection could be happened by through the means of a fault that is induced in that part of the grid. So what you'll see is that the other generators, their output increases, and that is there's a control system in it's called governor control, and that automatically increases the output of all the other generators to respond to this loss of generation, so they compensate for the attack. And if you look at the figure more closely, you'll see that the power flow arrows that are highlighted in green, they are highlighting how the other generators are compensating for the loss of power at bus 39. So you can see all the arrows are kind of in the direction of bus 39. Is there a question? Moving on. So let's talk about frequency response before we get to what primary frequency response is. So when that generator was disconnected, what you'd see is that green curve over here, the solid one. So the frequency at the time of the disconnection will drop. And then because of primary frequency response, it will kind of stabilize, and it will stabilize to a safe state. Now there is a threshold that you can see from that black dotted arrow that talks about where the difference between the safe state and the unsafe state. So the frequency were to drop below that threshold, then we'll have an issue. I'll talk about that in a bit. But let's just focus on the green curve to begin with. So what primary frequency response does is it restores the frequency above that threshold that I just talked about, and its job is to get that done within the first 30 seconds. It doesn't need to worry about what happens after 30 seconds, because as long as it succeeds in maintaining the frequency above that threshold in the first 30 seconds, then there is secondary frequency response, also called automatic generation control, abbreviated with AGC, that will bring that frequency up. Right now, in the green curve, it's like something like 59.75. It will bring it up to 60 hertz because it takes 30 seconds for AGC to kick in. Now, if primary frequency response fails to bring the frequency up within that 30-second mark, then you will have what's called under-frequency load shedding, and that will lead to an outage. So what's going to happen eventually is that my attacker is going to kind of cause the situation to happen and induce the situation, and there is a timing requirement. The attacker needs to bring the frequency down within the first 30 seconds. If they don't manage to do it within 30 seconds, then AGC will bring back the system, but even before AGC can bring back the system, they can cause an outage over here. So that is the case when primary frequency response fails. Now, there are other failures, like if AGC fails to bring the frequency back up, in that case also, even in that case, you can have under frequency load shedding. That has been extensively studied in related work. So we are looking at a problem that's not been studied, which is the failure of this primary frequency response. We're using power world for transient simulations because power world can model these changes in frequency. So that threshold that I talked about is set by NERC, the North American Electric, I should know this, Electric Reliability Council. Yeah. So what you see over here is the same curve that's on a logarithmic scale. That's why you see a straight line. But in my plot, I've actually plotted it not in a logarithmic scale. That's why you see the concave curve there. So looking at that primary frequency response attack. So we're calling it the PFR restriction attack. And here the identity, as I said earlier, could be a nation state, could be a terror group, or it could be an energy company like Enron. And the attacker's goal is to cause an outage by being inconspicuous. So you want to throw off malicious intent, so the outage looks like it was non-malicious. It was caused by some fault that was not induced by an attack. So the attacker's capability is that they can infiltrate the OT network, and then they can modify this control setting called Pmax. So let's talk about that. So by default, this control setting Pmax, it restricts how much a generator can generate, and it is set at about 20% beyond the generator's rating. So in the earlier example that I showed you, when I disconnected generator 1 and the other generators were compensating, you will see that in this case, generator 4, 8, and 10 are generating beyond 100%. So how is that even possible, right? So 100% is their rated power. How can they exceed their rated power? And they can, because this Pmax value has been set 20% above their rated power to allow for this compensation to happen for a short period of time. So generators are able to generate beyond their rated capacity for a very short period of time. If they were to generate beyond their rated capacity for a long period of time, then they would sustain damages and they may need to be replaced. But that's why this Pmax can be set at a higher value. The restriction attack is pretty simple. So the idea is that the attacker gets into this Pmax parameter and then reduces that value to 90%. So and that's in this example. It could be any other percentage, and I'll talk about different percents. But in doing so, there's still only one generator that was disconnected, but you can have a blackout because the frequency is not able to come back up because the other generators are not compensating as much as they need to. And you can ask, the attacker can simply disconnect multiple generators. Well, yes, they can, but if they did disconnect multiple generators, then it would be it would be more conspicuous, and it could definitely be more suspicious that there is malicious intent. So let's talk about how this attack works. So there are two broad phases in these attacks. So similar to crash override, there's an attack preparation phase. So in this case, the attacker spends many months, maybe over a year, trying to understand the system, trying to understand the weaknesses, and performing these social engineering attacks in order to get access to the system. Then finally, there's the attack execution phase. That happens. Yeah, question? So the first step is to gain access to the OT network. I can hear the typing, so you can answer that question.
I think he's doing an email.
Kind of.
You meet him?
There's just like going to get a 700
Okay, I'll keep talking and answer questions. Okay, so how do you gain access to the OT network? The attacker is somewhere on the internet, and so I've illustrated it with the type of hoodie. That's how all hackers generally the guy has to have a hoodie, taken seriously. And so he's outside the organization's perimeter. So in order to get into the system, you may think that they would need to go through this perimeter firewall to get into the IT network, and then there's an access control layer to get into the OT network. So it seems very difficult for an attacker to do. So the way it happens is through social engineering, or as people like to call it, email. So whoever is typing email, be careful that you're not sending links that are suspicious. So so you get into the system through social engineering, and then you're in the IT network. So social engineering could be like phishing attacks, spear phishing, attacks like that. And then there's lateral movement from the IT to OT network. So once you're in the IT network, you kind of scan for access privileges to get you to the OT network, look around for keys that will give you that access. Then you get into the OT network. And once you're in the OT network, you can install malware there to control that setting of PMAX in the generator controller. Now, once you've installed that malware, you're now ready to launch the attack. So this could take many months to get to this stage. But now, once you're in this stage, in just an instant, you could either wait for a fault to happen, or you could trigger the fault in that generator one, and then that would cause a blackout. So let's talk about the minimum effort for an attacker to cause an outage, and we've used our world to come up with this minimum effort. So what you see on the right is a region that describes the attack parameters that would cause an outage and that would not cause an outage. The vertical axis is the minimum number of generators that an attacker would need to compromise, and the horizontal axis is essentially the PMAX value. So what you're seeing here is, for example, if you look at this particular point that is highlighted with PMAX over 90%. So when PMAX is reduced to 90%, then you would need to compromise 9 generators, so at least 9 generators in order to cause an outage. If you were to compromise less than 9 generators, then you would not be able to cause an outage. But let's take another example. So let's say you were to reduce PMAX to 55%. So in that case, you would need to compromise only 5 generators, and the other 4 in the system would not need to be compromised. So if you look at that line between outage and no outage, that tells you what the minimum effort is, both in terms of how many generators you need to compromise and in terms of to what extent you need to compromise each generator. And this makes sense because what it says is that if the attack on each generator is more severe, then you need to compromise fewer generators. So that's kind of the intuitive conclusion from this, but the idea is that we can analyze the attack based on the minimum effort. So what is a good time to attack the grid? I think everyone who's been in CREDC for long enough knows the answer to that question. You attack the grid when the load is high. So the result of the screen kind of reinforces that fact. So in the first case, you've got the load at 85% of the total generation capacity. The second case is 90%, and the third case is 95%. And what you can see is that that region that quantifies what the probability of the outage is, it becomes larger. So So there are more parameter settings when there is 95% load that can cause the outage than when there is 85% load, for example. So the conclusion here is that the greater the load, the greater the chance of the outage. And people wanted me to point out that as I'm increasing the load, I'm keeping the excitation constant, because there was a case, you said what, 1950s when
60s.
60s, okay.
The worst blackout was at nighttime. Light load, the grid is more vulnerable. So it's actually really tough during heavy load. It's very weak during light load because the excitation of generators goes down at nighttime.
Right.
And so the magnetic fields are not as strong.
Right.
So it's more vulnerable because the excitation is low.
Right.
There is no output of bars.
Right.
So most people would say light load is the danger.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're here keeping the excitation the constant. That's when you see the other conclusion. So the challenge for detection is that the attacker, just like in Stuxnet, they could get into the OT network and they could compromise the human-machine interface. So you may ask yourself, okay, hey, your Pmax has been reduced. How can you not see that on your screen? You can't see it because the attacker has compromised your screen. As simple as that. So to circumvent that challenge, the solution is to use some redundant out-of-band measurement. So, for example, you can have some RPM meter, also called a tachometer, that is air-gapped, but that measures the RPM speed. So that's one way to check whether the frequency that you're seeing on your screen is what the frequency actually is. It's kind of validating your screen to make sure that it's not been compromised. Now, this is some new stuff that both Pete and especially Al will find fun. So this semester I was supervising a graduate student, Boya, and we were looking at what are some other ways, like side channels that we can use to detect this attack. So the first thing that I thought of was vibration, because people are using vibration monitors to check the health of the system, and vibration has been successful in identifying when there's a fault in a generator because the vibration patterns change. So we were doing an experiment in the Granger Power Lab here in the ECU building in Illinois, and what you see in that diagram is it's both a synchronous motor and a synchronous generator. So it's kind of like a two-functional system. It's manufactured by Advanced Motor Tech. So it's a 4-pole synchronous generator configuration that we have. And what we're doing is we're basically spinning the generator at different speeds. And first what we did was we were measuring the vibration on the body of the device. But in this particular device, the vibration was not giving us any useful insights because the device is so well lubricated that the vibrations outside of the device were minimal. So in this small scale generator, and by small scale I'm talking about this is like 1.5 kilowatt generator. So vibration did not work. And so Boya was like, oh, this is not working. I'm almost done with the semester. What do I do? And so I went over to the lab, and then I realized something very obvious. The sound that the generator was making at different rotation speeds was different, and it's not very different. So I'm going to play the sounds the generator makes at different speeds. So let's look first at 58 hertz. Okay, it's not playing on this side.
You have to click it.
No, it is playing. Okay, that's right. No, it's playing.
Is there?
Did you hear it?
No, it's not. I know it's playing remotely because I can hear buzzing sound remotely very faintly. Yeah, there could be a volume switch. Try that again. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to play that a couple of times, and so you're hearing the sound. Thank you, Linda.
Yeah.
Okay, and that is a D, so it's a D5. I'm talking about musical keys in the keyboard. Okay, and that's 58 hertz. So we're kind of translating that to RPM. So 60 hertz would be, I think, it's 1800 RPM for a 4-pole generator, and then you can do the math. So the idea is that the RPM would be 120 divided by the number of poles times frequency. So in this case, 30 times the frequency because 120 by 4 because it's a 4-pole generator. So you multiply this value by 30, 58 hertz by 30, and you get the RPM. Okay, so listen to it again. Now 60 hertz, which is 2 hertz more. It's only a sharp key one. Could you tell the difference, Ad?
Not really.
Not really. See, so Ad is a musician, so he couldn't tell the difference. So this may not be very.
It's not quite a semitone.
I thought it was lower.
It's a higher frequency.
Higher.
Yeah.
It's lower.
Yeah. Let's try that again. Okay. We can go back and forth until you're happy. My talk is not that long. Okay.
Oh, there's lower. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Are you happy?
It's not a semitone though, not quite as sharp.
It is pretty close to a sharp. I've looked up. In fact, I can even you can hold your phone, and there are apps for tuner apps.
I have a tuner app.
You can try it out. Try it out. I did it this morning. And not only that, you can I can give you the frequency, and you can there's a lookup table that will tell you where it is. And so I've even looked at that lookup table, and that. Did you think it was less than a semitone or more than?
I think it's less than a semitone. It's a little higher. I can hear this a little higher, but I don't think it's quite a full semitone.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, but the idea is that it's pretty close. The sound is pretty close, and the 2 hertz difference is an extremely huge difference in terms of the grid stability. So a person who's working in that environment, you may ask, oh, hey, they've reduced Pmax and now the generator is rotating a lot slower. They should be able to hear it, right? But then I just showed you that the frequency difference may not be that large that you may hear the difference, or you can come back in a different day and it may be so slight. And another thing that an attacker can do is right now you have a baseline, I'm playing 58 and then 60. And so you're using 58 as a baseline. But if the attacker were to gradually change it from 60 down to 58, then as you use baselines that are closer, you won't be able to tell the difference. So for example, if I'm going from 60 to 59.8, the frequency is less different than the 2 hertz. In fact, and I didn't show you how that maps up. So this was recorded using an iPhone, so nothing too fancy. And so let's get back to math. So we tried this on 2 different generators, and so we've got 2 axes here. The vertical axis is the rotation frequency in hertz. My bad, I should have put the units there. But yeah, so both are in hertz, the vertical axis and horizontal axis. And so the horizontal axis is the sound frequency that we're hearing. So you measure the sound from the iPhone, and then you look at the frequency of that sound. And you can see that it's a linear model. So this is quite an interesting result. So the idea is that if you look at the linear model a bullet below my plots, the rotation frequency is some slope times the sound frequency that I'm hearing plus some offset. And there is some variance, so that offset could be modeled as some Gaussian distribution. So we were thinking of that as some white noise. So, and especially if we're doing ordinary least squares regression, then we are automatically assuming that noise, that epsilon noise, is Gaussian. So you can design a detector based on that. So essentially the idea is that an operator walks into this room and has an iPhone, and on the iPhone it can pick up the frequency. So you've got the observed frequency, you've got the sound frequency, and then you've got the observed rotation frequency that is seen in your HMI device, which could be compromised. So if my observed rotation frequency, and if I were to subtract from that this the linear model, so basically transforming my sound frequency into rotation frequency. The difference between observed and actual rotation frequency is greater than some k sigma. So there could be some 3 times standard deviation or 5 times, 6 times standard deviation. If that deviation is large enough, then that goes back to the anomaly detection that Al was telling you that I've been doing for the most part of my PhD time here. So the idea is that this is an out-of-band detection approach. Someone walks in with an iPhone. The iPhone does not need to be connected to the IT or OT network. It could be on a cellular network, so the attacker does not need to have access to the iPhone to compromise the iPhone in addition to the HMI. So you can easily think of this as two separate systems. And so that's one way to do detection, a data-driven approach. Now, as Al also mentioned, that you can look at wind power as a special case. So if you look at wind turbines, then sure, you may be able to use the same approach, but it'd be kind of hard to take your iPhone up to where the turbine is.
Put it on a drone.
Put it in a drone. Yeah, you could do that. Yeah, but another simpler approach is that if you've got like some local weather station that's measuring wind speed, then there's a very well-known relationship between the wind speed and how much power should be generated from a wind turbine. And so you can use data to estimate that relationship. That relationship is called the power curve. So what you see in this plot over here is that relationship. The vertical axis is the wind power generation as a percentage of its capacity, and the horizontal axis is the wind speed. And the blue line at 100% essentially tells you that when the wind speed is greater than 14 meters per second, then the wind power generator is generating at 100% of its capacity. So let's take a closer look at when the wind power is at its rated capacity. So we're looking at wind speed greater than 40 meters per second. Then if you look at the distribution of wind power, so this is the distribution of wind power, then you can see that the wind power for the most part is around 100% given wind speed is greater than 40 meters per second. So let's say that that is your wind speed, and if you were to see a wind power value that is less than 92%, then you could say that that is a good detection threshold, because if we look at our data set, then, and we set the threshold at 92%, then only 2% of values in our data set were below 92% given that wind speed, and so that would give you a false positive rate of 2%. But the idea is that an attacker would need to reduce Pmax to, it would have to be only above, so if they were to reduce it below 92%, then we would detect it, right? Because that's where our threshold is. So if they were to reduce Pmax within the 100% and 92%, then what we showed using our analysis, when I showed you this plot earlier, is that 92% may not be enough to cause a blackout. And so we're kind of setting it quite at a very high value. So it's a very strict detection threshold. So Pmax can only be varied by up to 8% below the rated capacity. And so it would easily help you validate that your turbine is not rotating as fast as it should given the wind speed conditions. And there's some additional validation on a test set just to show that false positive rate kind of consistent over different sections of the data set. All right, so in summary, we discussed how primary frequency response can be compromised to induce outages. That can be done using by compromising the Pmax parameter, which can be, and in order to compromise that, you do need access to the OT network. We also quantified the minimum effort that an attacker needs to put in. So Pmax must be reduced by sufficient amount, so I talked about what the reduction would be for sufficient number of generators. I also talked about that in those plots to cause an out-of-frequency outage. And we said that the attacker can spoof the human-machine interface. You can't rely on that to tell whether the attack is going on. So when we talked about the mitigation approaches, we first talked about detection. So we need a redundant out-of-band measurement to validate the HMI readings. And for all generators, we can use these audio measurements to indicate the turbine rotation speed. And for wind generators in particular, we could use wind speed as a way to detect anomalies in wind power output. So these attacks can be prevented with better cyber hygiene. So you could train your personnel against social engineering attacks so that the attacker cannot get into your IT network in the first place. And you can have strong authentications. You can have two-factor authentication in order to get into these critical control parameters in your OT network. And if you know that the attacker is in your network, then one way to respond would be to isolate these controllers from the OT network, because you know that the OT network has been compromised. So then once you've isolated the faulty control, you're going to reset it to some safe settings, and now the attacker cannot get in there because it's the controller has been isolated from your OT network. So yeah, that's the end of my talk, and thank you all for listening, and especially I want to thank everyone who's been at TCG and CREDC. So not only the people who were here, but people who were here and who've left while I continue to be here. So people like Sherry and Amy who helped so much. Two Amy's who are out here. I have to thank so many people who've been great help to me, all the ITI staff, CREDC staff. It's been wonderful working with all of you. It's been wonderful working with collaborators remotely. And yes, so thank you for that here. I'm ready to take questions.
Does anybody have any questions for Varun? Either online or in the room?
You going to California?
Yeah.
Sorry to hear that.
I love California.
Oh, yeah.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. No, I mean, usually sarcastic. Yeah, I mean, they do have their issues with their forests burned, but.
Yeah. When you want to buy a house, come back.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. All right.
Can I cover the Tutor app?
Yeah, sure. So I think Linda's also sent you the deck, so you can try it at home as well.
Let's do it.
All right, guys, thank you so much for coming, and please look at the 2019 schedule, and have a happy holiday.
I even downloaded it.
I think
I downloaded it onto my computer.
Because you are very good at listening and following directions, and I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate having it to look at.
Well, I appreciate you always following through.
Hey.
I have a question. Rakesh, if you have a question, now would be the time to ask it. You just need to unmute yourself. I see that you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. It's not coming through.
Yeah, I mean, you can pick it up.
Okay. Apparently he can hear me, but we can't hear him.
Ask him to type the question.
Yeah, can you type the question?
He just said he's gonna email you.
All right.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks, happy holidays. Happy holidays to you too.
Is that Rakesh Boba?
What?
Rakesh Boba?
Yeah.
Oh, it's probably going to be a farewell.
Oh, okay.
He said yes, the one and only.
Huh?
I said, yeah, he said yes, the one and only.
Okay.
There's another one here.
Right, thanks enough for me.
Yeah, of course, thank you. And
So-
thanks, I didn't realize that when you said you had submitted your stuff, that you were literally like done and like leaving.
On the way out.
Yep.
So they're in Redwood City, California?
That's right. He's visited the office.
I used to live in San Carlos.
Oh, okay.
That's close.
Yeah.
I remember that. I've only been there twice.
Beautiful area and
Yeah, actually, so